people should be raising bloody hell right now. Abortion matters for everyone, everywhere. And the streets should be filled with people demanding abortion on demand and without apology.
These are fascists. They tried to carry out an armed insurrection on January 6th. And after that, they purged their party. The Republican Party purged itself, not of those who called for the insurrection, aided the insurrection, rationalized the insurrection, brought Confederate flags and sanctioned all of that. They didn't purge themselves of those people. They purged themselves of the elements of the Republican Party who didn't want to use fascist violence and voter suppression to outright lock in permanent fascist minority rule.
There was a pre-acceptance of this and a capitulation. And some of the illusions that people have clung to, like medical abortions are going to make this law unenforceable. That's one of them, that if we get enough abortion pills out to people, then it won't matter because they'll get abortions.
People say, well, they're against abortion, but they don't really care about babies because they don't take care of health care and all these other child care needs. Well, okay, that's true. That's hypocrisy. But then what's beneath it? And just like you're saying, my body, my choice when it comes to masks, but not when it comes to abortion. Well, what's beneath it? I think you're right. It is a fascist program. And I think that pointing out the hypocrisy is a start. But if you leave it at that, you're kind of wagging your finger at these people. And rather than doing what we have a responsibility to do, which is to say, where is this coming from and where is it leading?
Welcome to episode 75 of the Refuse Fascism podcast. This podcast is brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of this show. Refuse Fascism exposes, analyzes, and stands against the very real danger and threat of fascism coming to power in this country. I want to let our listeners who are dealing with the effects of Hurricane Ida know that you are on our minds. We hope you're safe. We've got a lot to get into at this emergency moment with the Texas unconstitutional pre-viability abortion ban now in effect. You know, the ban that deputizes civilians to carry it out. So I'm keeping my remarks short, but want to let you know we've got a lot more to say on our social media feeds, so be sure to follow at Refuse Fascism. Today, we're talking about the horrific SB 8. The new law effectively bans all abortions after the 6th week of pregnancy in the state of Texas, well before most pregnant folks ever even know they're pregnant. The law is basically also a bounty law that not only encourages private citizens anywhere in this country to sue anyone who can be seen as helping someone in Texas seek an abortion. That means doctors, friends, rape counselors, donors, those who provide any sort of financial support, even the Uber driver who takes someone to get an abortion, the receptionist of the abortion clinic. They can drag them to court, and that person can be fined up to $10,000. But first, you might be asking, why do we keep covering this supposed quote unquote special interest issue on a show that is devoted to the larger political battle against fascism here in the US and its connection to the rise of fascism around the world? Well, in the words of Dr. Hearn, the anti-abortion movement is the face of fascism in the United States. This movement is centered on a political program of white supremacy, the subjugation of women, theocracy, and a form of rule enforced by fear and coercion. It's a violent movement that has assassinated 11 abortion providers and staff. And it's a movement with a mass-based, organized and funded by elite sections of society. There's the alt-right, and there's QAnon, and there's Trump. But before all that, there was the anti-abortion movement, which murdered Dr. George Tiller in 2009. The role of women in the world, whether we are to be more than breeders of children, has been one of the touch points for determining whether society is so-called modern or not. Trump's Make America Great Again was by definition hearkening back to some earlier time when society was ordered in the quote unquote right way. It should be no surprise that the roots of the anti-abortion movement, the Christian fascist movement, rose to political power through their role in white supremacist segregationist efforts. White supremacy and patriarchy are bound together and are key pillars of this program we see aggressively being fought for by this fascist movement. So as the right to abortion continues to be one of the most important battlegrounds on this larger one of the most important battlegrounds this larger political battle is fought, we have to put attention to it and sound the alarm. To get into why this is happening, where this is leading, why the fuck there is no resistance, and how do we change that situation? I'm so glad to be joined by fellow editorial board member and host of the show, Coco, who lives in Texas, and Sunsara Taylor, who is the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show and the host of We Only Want the World on WPFW and WBAI. Sunsara is also a co-initiator of refusefascism.org. Thanks you both for joining me today.
It's so good to be with you. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. It's good to be here.
So let's first start, Sunsara, with what's happening here. Can you walk us through what it means that this law is now in effect? What does this look like for the people of Texas?
Yes, starting Wednesday, September 1st, this new fascist abortion ban went into effect in the state of Texas, immediately banning all abortions after approximately 6 weeks into pregnancy. This is long before most women even know that they are pregnant. Up until almost the stroke of midnight on Tuesday night before this law went into effect, the clinics were still in the abortion clinics in Texas were still seeing women who had flocked to their doors across the state, desperate to terminate unwanted pregnancies. And then starting at midnight and every minute since, these clinics in Texas have been forced to turn women away who are seeking abortions, women who are pregnant or discovering they're pregnant, who do not want to carry a pregnancy to term. They are being told by the state of Texas that their desires, their lives, their aspirations do not matter. They are nothing more than incubators and breeders of children, and they are being forced by the state to have children against their will. I read in the Washington Post, just to give a sense of this, one of the doctors, Joe Nelson at the Whole Women's Health Clinic, said that a patient came in on Wednesday who was more than 6 weeks pregnant and had taken medication to induce an abortion before the ban took effect. But the medication failed. This is rare, but sometimes happens. But by the time he saw her, it was illegal for the clinic to terminate her pregnancy. And now I want to quote from the article. This is the doctor speaking. He says, not only does she have to continue the pregnancy, but it's a pregnancy that's higher risk because of the medication she took. He sat with the woman as she cried. This is one woman's life, but think about the 17-year-olds who had sex with their boyfriends or maybe somebody they hardly know, who have dreams of their future, of going to college, of having a life. We're being told right now, no, that's over. Your dreams are foreclosed. You're being saddled with a child, whether you want one or not. Think about the women who already have 2 or 3 kids, or 4 or 5, who are struggling to support the children they have, who can't take on another child. Or think about the women who are trapped in abusive relations, who are being forced to have the child of their abuser, binding them and cementing them more permanently into the coils of that abuse for the rest of their lives. And think about all the women who, for whatever reason, for any reason, do not want to take on a child at this point in their life or perhaps ever. This is being forced upon them. And exactly like you said in the opening, a vigilante bounty is being rewarded to any woman hater anywhere, any Christian fascist, American Taliban style hater of women, any stalker, any vengeful ex-boyfriend, any fundamentalist parent, any stranger anywhere on this planet to be part of hunting down those who would assist a woman in terminating a pregnancy. This is an unprecedented fascist law that is blatantly violates the constitutionally protected right to abortion that was established in Roe v. Wade in 1973. And it is written in such a way as to insulate the law from being challenged because the state itself is not enforcing it. It's given the enforcement over to private citizens. And on Thursday, the Supreme Court voted by 5-4 to let this blatantly unconstitutional law go into effect. And so this is an immediate duel. There are fascist assault, one on the lives of women. And we must be clear, forced motherhood is female enslavement. It is a form of, it is every bit as violating, as dehumanizing, and as enslaving as rape is. It is, if you want to have a child and you're ready to have a child, it can be a very beautiful thing. But if you do not want a child and you are forced to by the state, by the patriarchal fascist networks of fundamentalist Christianity and everything bound up with it, which now is, yes, given the backing of the state and private vigilantes, that is a form of enslavement. And that was given a green light. And other states are already copying the laws and working to put that into effect. This is giving a green light to this hatred and enslavement of women. And there was a green light given to really a violent end run around the rule of law. And this has broader implications overall, that we now have a fascist majority Supreme Court. And the implications of that, of the courts themselves and of the legislative bodies in this country being turned into instruments of fascist atrocity. There's much bigger implications that if this is not stopped. And so that is now the reality. And the last thing I'll say about what's happening in Texas right at this moment, there are fascist vigilantes outside the abortion clinics taking down license plates, getting ready to punish and sue anybody who they can accuse of assisting a woman. This is right now. This is not hypothetical. This is right now, and it's within a month or so, the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear a case that's a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade openly, and they've agreed to take it. So really, we're at a tipping point in what has been a decades-long Christian fascist all-out assault on the lives and the humanity and the role of women in society, and it is bound up completely with the all-around fascism that Refuse Fascism was formed to oppose and has rightly called out since day one.
Thank you for that, Sunsara. I want to underscore that Texas, what's going on in Texas is a beginning. It's an opening salvo to a further wave of attacks, both on this, what I would say, most fundamental right to abortion and the rule of law as we know it. And we're seeing that with the copycat laws that Sunsara alluded to in Florida, along with other red states moving to immediately pass copycat laws. We're seeing it in what's going down with Mississippi and what's on the docket for next month in front of the Supreme Court, which could be the end of Roe v. Wade. And I think that this is a stop everything moment for the lives of women in Texas and the lives of people everywhere who care about the right to abortion and see women and others seeking abortion as full human beings. So I just wanted to highlight that. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, Sunsara, for those who are younger and those who just may not get this at this moment. Why is the attack on abortion rights so central to the Christian fascist movement in this country?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I appreciate that. Let me start by pulling back the lens on the position and role of women overall, and then I'll come to the centrality of abortion in that context. Over 35 years ago, the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who's the architect of a new framework for human emancipation, what we call the new communism, and a core part of this revolutionary communism, the new communism that he has been forging and is actively leading people to take up. I'm a follower of Bob Avakian. A core part of it is identifying even more deeply the centrality of the oppression of women, of patriarchy, to all systems of oppression, all systems of exploitation, since there have been class divisions in the history of humanity, including in the system that we live under of capitalism, imperialism, and how central the question of breaking the chains on women and unleashing the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution is to making a liberating revolution, which is what humanity needs to get beyond this system of capitalism, imperialism, which is not only got patriarchy woven into it, but is now destroying the planet. It's driving the destruction of the climate, of the planet we live on. It's got white supremacy woven into its fabric and foundation in this country, in America. It's pursuing and has throughout history wars of aggression, crimes against humanity, armies of occupation. We've seen this the last 20 years, the devastation the U.S. has brought to Iraq, to Afghanistan, and many other wars. The only country in the world that has dropped nuclear bombs on civilians. So this is a system that needs to go, and that is a foundational need. But one of the things that Bob Avakian has looked at, including in taking on the responsibility to forge a way to make that revolution, is the centrality of the oppression of women. And in this light, over 35 years ago, he made this analysis, which I want to quote from, and then speak a bit about how it relates to the moment we're in today. He said, over the past several decades in the United States, there have been profound changes in the situation of women and the relations within the family. In only 1 of 10 families is there the, quote, model situation where the husband is the, quote, sole breadwinner and the wife a totally dependent, quote, homemaker. With these economic changes have come significant changes in attitudes and expectations, and very significant strains, not only on the fabric of the family, but of social relations more broadly. The whole question of the position and role of women in today's society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the US today. It is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in these chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all forms of such enslavement? And this was over 35 years ago. He said this, and this has only intensified and become more and more explosive, a powder keg, more and more explosive today, and now really coming to a head where you have in society, a society split down the middle with tens of millions who really believe. Yesterday, one of these conservative, quote unquote conservative, really a fascist commentator, was out there speaking openly about the host body and the life inside of it, the person inside of it, the host body. He wasn't speaking about women. They were host bodies. And this is not misspeak. This is honesty. This is them being more honest. But this is their program. A whole tens of millions who see women as property of men and breeders of children and are determined to, it's part of Make America Great Again, going back to the days where women were literally property and breeders and slamming that back into place. That's a fascist resolution. Or you have millions and millions throughout society who see women as human beings who should have control over their lives. But which future wins out is really what's at stake right now. And abortion sits in the middle of this because abortion and birth control gave women a dimension of freedom to control their fertility, which was at the core of being able to enter into public life, into all spheres of society. When for thousands of years, before birth control and abortion were widely and safely available, women really were subject. Biology was destiny to a very large degree. That is no longer the case. Women, you would not see women in public life, in the universities, in the classrooms, in the professorships, in public media, in the sports, in the sciences. Everything that's been done, yes, has been won through struggle of women, but also through the fact that women have not been saddled with child after child after child that they did not want or could not care for. So this question of being able to control one's fertility is very central to being able to be treated as a full human being who is able to participate fully and freely and equally in society. And that is, right now, society is split down the middle over whether that should be the case. And one side is winning, and the other side actually has to get mobilized in a very serious way, because there's a basis. There are tens of millions of us, and right is on our side. But that is a fight that needs to be waged.
Coco, I want to bring you into this conversation. I was hoping that you could share a little bit about what you're hearing in Texas, and what you're learning from friends, from family, on the ground. What are people saying, doing? If you could speak to that, and then I know that you had some questions that you wanted to bring in as well.
You know, especially among young women, there is an awareness of what this law means, and there is tremendous fear and outrage. And you can see that in some, you know, like the graduation speech of Paxton Smith, where she threw out her, you know, approved graduation speech to sound the alarm on this emergency. This was back in May, before the law went into effect. A friend of mine was showing me a thread of high school students who were talking to each other about the law. Some friends went to a university campus and spoke to some of the students, and they were aware of how this law is going to affect their lives and their futures. And then among, you know, some older women I know, there's a tremendous amount of fear for, you know, their daughters and, you know, the women they know who are still of childbearing age. At the same time, along with that awareness and fear and outrage, there is a lot of helplessness and, you know, not knowing what to do. A little bit of, you know, expression that the Democratic Party is not, they don't have a lot of faith that the Democratic Party is going to undo this in any way. At the same time, no real understanding of what could be done about it. And then there is some sort of, like, I guess I would call it grasping of straws, where, you know, and I don't know how much this is taking hold, but I do know that this has been a trend in the movement here, where there was a pre-acceptance of this and a capitulation. And I would, you know, love to hear Sunsara speak more to this, but and some of the illusions that people have clung to, like medical abortions are going to make this law unenforceable. That's one of them, that if we get enough abortion pills out to people, then it won't matter because they'll get abortions. And I think that story that Sunsara told from the Washington Post, that doctor's story where, you know, a medical abortion failed, is one, you know, big reason why that there are many reasons why that can't be relied on. So there, you know, I would say, I guess that there's a mixed bag of messages out there and things that people are sort of clinging to as the way out of this. But, you know, I think that there is a potential for the rage and the courage of young women to be unleashed. I saw a photo of some dancers, 12 to 16 years old, dancing in handmaids costumes in front of the Capitol at a small protest that they had. But, you know, I think that this movement has been on a defensive posture for so long tailing the Democratic Party and conciliating with the terms of the Christian fascist anti-abortion movement, that we're really coming in from so far behind. And I think that people thought that this would be stopped in the courts, that something would intervene. And, you know, there is a level of shock that didn't happen. I would like to pose a question to Sunsara, which is about some of these illusions. And Sunsara, you were here, I think, in 2013 for the Abortion Rights Freedom Ride. And I think it would actually be helpful if you talked a little bit about that. But, just to speak to some of the illusions that there is a workaround of this law through distributing medical abortions or ferrying women out of the state, or I think people are now pouring money, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't, but people are pouring money into these sort of mitigation efforts, right? Where, you pay into an abortion fund that will help pay for women to be ferried out of the state. Why is that not an ultimate answer to this?
Yeah, so to your couple parts in what you said. First, just because I'm glad you prompted me. In 2013 and 2014, I led abortion rights freedom rides with dozens of volunteers, 30 or 40 from around the country, who traveled the country from New York all the way out to California and from North Dakota all the way down to Texas. And we visited every state with only one abortion clinic. We rallied people to stand up, to speak out, to raise their voices against this. And one of the things that I went into this knowing and seeing the fascist assault on women escalating. And one of the things that shocked me, that I learned on such a more profound level than when we set out, was at every single stop, every single state, every single town, from Kansas to Fargo, North Dakota, to New York City, to Mississippi, Chicago, Cleveland, everywhere we were, every single time we set up in public and did a speak out on this, women who did not plan to attend, who were just passing by, who heard and saw what we were doing, came and they shared their stories of women that they knew. Older women did this, of women that they knew who had died from illegal abortions before Roe v. Wade, before 1973, of family members who did not make it, or of their own harrowing experiences of barely surviving or having an abortion, but having to endure sexual assault in the back alley from the man who gave them the abortion. This was so widespread and is so little understood. And it's not just that. It's the women who are forced to have children against their will, who don't go down that road and have their lives foreclosed. It's the women who risk their lives or lose their lives through lack of access to safe legal abortion. And it's the weight of shame, of patriarchy, of dehumanization that sits on top of every woman and every girl when it is illegal and criminalized. And the fact that this is so little understood and still something that women carry in silence is a testament to how much the so-called pro-choice movement, women's movement, all tied to the Democratic Party, has been on the defensive and has accepted the fascist assault and the fascist terms that shame women for getting abortion and that elevate the fetus and treat it like a person and treat the woman exactly like a host body, that claim there's something to feel bad about or wrong about abortion. So how do we get here and how do we get out? I think we have to confront that, as I was saying before, the system itself has never been on the side of women. Part of what I was getting at, and I hope I made clear, but I think maybe a little bit more needs to be said about this quote I read from Bob Avakian. He says, look, the workings of capitalism itself on a global scale has pulled women into the workforce. It has undermined traditional forms of patriarchy all over the world. And yet it cannot end patriarchy. So there's been a violent reassertion in the form of fascist fundamentalism here and all over the world in different ways. And this yes, there's been advances, but I think people, because there's been struggle and because, yes, the workings of capitalism have undermined the traditional family and traditional forms of patriarchy, but people have mistaken this for the notion that you could end patriarchy under this system. And they've mistaken the fact that the Democratic Party has made concessions to this struggle, as opposed to the Republican Party, which has just frontally rejected this and lashed out against it. The fact that the Democratic Party has made concessions to women's rights, and yes, is probably composed of many people who genuinely wish that women were more equal. But that is not the same as being a vehicle for women's liberation and to deliver a victory in this. And I think we have to confront that for several decades now, the so-called movement, the mainstream women's organizations and pro-choice organizations have been completely subordinated and tied to the Democratic Party and its insistence of relying on the courts, relying on the legislation, relying on norms that are being shattered, and continually seeking common ground and seeking, yes, to mitigate the worst, to sand the edge off the latest assault rather than fighting to change the direction. And at this point, we have to confront the courts have been packed with fascists at every level and turned into instruments of fascist atrocity. That is what is happening today in Texas. That's what the Supreme Court just sanctioned. The legislatures, the legislative bodies are turned into instruments of fascist atrocity. That's what Texas just did. That's what Florida is doing now. And that is not going to stop. Yes, there are loopholes that you can still work within to help some women get across the state lines, although that's being criminalized in Texas. Yes, there's some people passing laws in New York and other places to protect abortion. But all of this is expecting and accepting that Roe v. Wade will fall, that abortion will become criminalized nationwide. And it's accepting that. And the most you can do is work within that and protect abortion for some women. And there are many things profoundly wrong with that. One is it's immoral to abandon the women who are hit by this right now. Absolutely immoral. Women who cannot access abortion, women who right now are being forced to have children against their will. Two, it is a delusion that any of these loopholes are going to stay open. The day after, I believe it was the day after Texas criminalized abortion or banned abortion, they also introduced a law to make it illegal to mail medication abortion through the mail. So, you think that you're going to have a loophole. You're not. These are fascists. They tried to carry out an armed insurrection on January 6th. And after that, they purged their party. The Republican Party purged itself, not of those who called for the insurrection, aided the insurrection, rationalized the insurrection, brought Confederate flags and sanctioned all of that. They didn't purge themselves of those people. They purged themselves of the elements of the Republican Party who didn't want to use fascist violence and voter suppression to outright lock in permanent fascist minority rule. So this is not, we're not dealing with, can we help a few women here or there? Can we work within the loopholes? They're not going to leave New York City alone. They're not going to leave Boston alone. You're not going to protect this in a few places, and they're not going to give you the right. Texas is showing you they're not going to give you the right to help some women do their own medical abortions without locking you up. That's their program. They're going to lock you up. They're going to shame you. They're going to criminalize you. And it's part of a whole white supremacist, anti-immigrant, science-denying, climate-destroying wrecking ball that they're bringing to this country and to humanity. And we have to confront that for what it is. And the final thing that's wrong with this, well, there's two more things. I realize two more things wrong with this is that if you don't wage society-wide struggle in the streets, decrying this, refusing to go along, drawing a line, mobilizing the outrage of millions, you will not lift the shame and the fear and the ignorance that sits on women right now. You won't stop the law, which actually we have a shot to do. So don't give that up, because that's what we need to do. You need to stop this before the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. Before they hear the case, people need to be out there raising bloody hell, changing the calculus of the political forces, breaking loose of the killing confines of the Democratic Party and those who will tell you to wait for it. People need to mobilize to stop this. That's the first in the, of the two things that I have left. You have to actually fight to stop this. And two, as you do that, if you do that, you can change the thinking and attitudes of millions. You can arouse many more who don't yet understand this. If you don't, you're actually conceding. Most women won't even know to look for a self-medication abortion. They will be so shamed, so isolated, so convinced that they are doing wrong, that their lives will be foreclosed without this or put at grave risk. So, you're conceding the whole public discourse and attitude, cultural attitude, by just working within this assault.
Thank you, Sunsara. That was a very thorough answer. I mean, one other thing I would say is that there's also, this complete this sort of, I guess, oversimplifying. The one of the things that keeps coming up is, oh, look at the hypocrisy of these Republicans, where they don't want mask mandates, but they want to control women's bodies. And, just the thing I'll say about that is I think that there's just a failure of seeing the whole fascist trajectory and aim of this, that for them, it's not hypocritical. It's not about even the mask mandates is not about, even as they say it, my body, my choice. That's not a principle that they really uphold. It's that, they're fighting for a society that is ruled and dominated by their white supremacy and their misogyny, and that they're fighting for a certain vision of society. And all of these things help to enforce that vision that they're going for. And that's just, something else that I've been hearing here in Texas. But
I think that's really important. And I think in general, whenever there's gross hypocrisy, it's good to see it. It's good to point it out. But then it always begs the question, okay, well then, obviously, what's consistent between the two positions? What's beneath that hypocrisy? People say, well, they're against abortion, but they don't really care about babies because they don't take care of healthcare and all these other childcare needs. Well, okay, that's true. That's hypocrisy. But then what's beneath it? And just like you're saying, my body, my choice when it comes to masks, but not when it comes to abortion. Well, what's beneath it? I think you're right. It is a fascist program. And I think that pointing out the hypocrisy is a start, but if you leave it at that, you're kind of wagging your finger at these people. And rather than doing what we have a responsibility to do, which is to say, where is this coming from and where is it leading? And what is needed on our side by people who don't want to see that future? And there is a positive. Okay, this is a very dangerous situation, and people are in denial about it. People who say we're going to help women with self-medication abortions, or we're going to help pass a few defensive laws in a few places, are in complete denial about the fascist atrocity, the steamrolling at humanity in all its dimensions. And frankly, they're facilitating it through their denial and through their loud proclamations that we could deal with it some other way. So we're in a very dangerous situation that needs to be radically turned around very quickly. But within this coming apart of the norms that have been, within the coming apart, even of something that people have taken for granted, like abortion rights, it's negative. There's nothing positive about it coming apart and being undermined. But within this, there is actually potential if we are honest. And if we dig, if we look beneath the hypocritical surface, if we dig it, where is this coming from and what kind of system we live under? What is this system of capitalism, imperialism that has never delivered and can never deliver women's full emancipation or an end to white supremacy, but now is fueling fascism? A system whose democracy has always been a cover for and a form of dictatorship of this system, but those norms are coming apart. We should confront that and get honest about the only and the real alternative. And right now, there's a challenge for people to get out in the streets to break free of the pacification of the Democratic Party and the so-called leaders who are telling people to wait for the courts or work within the normal channels when those channels cannot serve to end this assault on women. There's a need for people to break loose of that, but there's also a need for people to look at the problem and the solution with fresh eyes. And Bob Avakian has recently issued a piece that says we are in a rare time when revolution becomes possible. And he gets into why that is so and how to seize on this rare opportunity, which really says in the coming apart of these norms that have held for about 150 years since the Civil War, with the splitting apart, with the bitter fight at the top of society, among the rulers and all the way down in the base of society among basically two countries in one that cannot be put back together except on the terms of fascism. There is a need and a basis to wrench a revolution out of this.
Sunsara, I thought that was really important. And I want to let people know that the analysis that Sunsara is getting into and the leadership that she takes from Bob Avakian, you can get that every week on the RNL show on YouTube. So check it out in the show notes. There's a link, and you can listen to her every Tuesday night on WBAI and WPFW. So definitely check both of those things out in the show notes. It's a perspective that needs to be heard. So I just wanted to put that in there. I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit. You know, we have all spoken to in various ways the need that people should be raising bloody hell right now. Abortion matters for everyone, everywhere. And the streets should be filled with people demanding abortion on demand and without apology. And Sunsara has gotten into a little bit of why we don't see that. One question that I often hear is, what difference does protest even make anyway? So what if people go into the street and march? What does that do? And so I was hoping that Sunsara and Coco, if you want to, could speak to that.
Well, I think protest makes a huge difference if it's in a number of dimensions, and fundamentally, if it's aiming to stop an outrage and not just aiming to get this or that measure passed within the system that is, or to express your frustration. But if you draw a line in society and say, this must not go down. We must not see women enslaved in this way, forced to have children against their will, treated as less than human. We need abortion on demand and without apology. Like you said, women are not incubators, fetuses are not babies, and abortion is not murder. This must not go down. And you arouse people to be in the streets behind that and fight until that is stopped. That is one thing. I'm not talking about a symbolic protest, a protest to get some PR. What we saw last summer with the beautiful rising against the murder of George Floyd shook society and shook the world. It changed the hearts and minds of millions. It mobilized, it galvanized the better side of people, and it brought that out of people. Millions of people began to look at the nature of this system, look at the questions of how deeply rooted is this white supremacy? What are these police doing? What is the state of terror that Black people are forced to endure every single day? This made a profound difference, and it changed the terms throughout society. But a big part of changing the attitudes, changing the terms in society, changing the thinking of people and lifting people's heads so that we don't accept what is unacceptable is stepping outside the terms of this system, putting something on the line and raising our voices and saying no. And there is a profound difference between, again, a protest that is out and a movement and a mobilization that is out to stop an outrage and atrocity and will not relent until we prevail, and something that's just symbolic and goes along. And right now, if the millions, and there are millions who know what's at stake already with this fascist abortion law in Texas, and the prospects of the likelihood of Roe v. Wade, being upended in the coming months, hanging by a thread right now and on the docket in the Supreme Court for the first time in decades openly. For those who know this, to be out in the streets drawing a fierce line saying no would wake up and arouse and galvanize millions more. And then you have a different playing field. Then the Supreme Court has to calculate that. Then the legislatures have to calculate that. And yes, the fascists will be out there hitting back. And in some ways they'll hit back even more fanatically. But even that can help clarify things and make people see, oh, this is not about babies. This is about treating women as host bodies. This is not about preserving life. This is about punishing and enslaving women. The more that gets clarified, and the more people stand up on our side, the more favorable it will be. And then, yes, people are going to have to get serious and organize for a revolution to really prevail. But it is within the realm of possibility right now to stop the fall of abortion rights in this country, just to prevent that. And that's what people have to fight for now. After the fact, it is much, much harder, much, much harder.
I wanted to join with that last part, Sunsara, and Coco, please interrupt if you have something to say. Once you have fascists in power, once that power is consolidated, what that means is the elimination of the rule of law and democratic and civil rights. And that makes it very, very hard to go out and defend, let alone stop the attack or assault on fundamental rights. And so this is a moment where we have not just a moral imperative to act, but a defined window of time to act, and a people who do not want to go along with this. There's millions of us who don't want to see people thrown back in time and have their lives erased and become incubators. There's millions of us, but it needs to be manifested. It needs to be in the streets. And so I just wanted to join with that. Coco, feel free to comment if you want.
The only thing I would add is, right now the silence is deafening. It's deafening. And one thing that mass protest in the way that Sunsara is describing would do is it would break that silence. And, part of what's so frustrating and heartbreaking right now is how emboldened these fascists are, that they don't think there's anything that's going to stand in their way, but the people can stand in their way, and the people can create a political crisis, especially that there are millions of us. One thing that this movement throws around a lot is the majority of people do not want the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What does that matter if we're not showing that we're the majority of people and that we're not going to stand? And it not only does something society-wide, I think the constant capitulation, the constant silencing does something to our own morality. It is transformative. Not stepping out is transformative as much as, mass protest is transformative, but it's, sort of in the way that you're talking about, will the resolution be emancipatory or reactionary? There's two ways that all this can be transformed, and which way do we want to transform society and our own sense of what's possible and our own sense of agency?
Yeah. So I wanted to bring something to both of you that's been trending for a bit on Twitter. People have been making the comparison on social media to what's happening in Texas to the Taliban, writing Texas Taliban or American Taliban. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on this comparison.
I think it's entirely appropriate. For years and years, I think it's been correct. And again, I'll give credit not in the, ownership capitalist sense, but in recognition that Bob Avakian has been really out front in identifying the assault on abortion rights as a Christian fascist assault. Not every Christian is behind this. It's a particular brand of Christianity, a fascist, biblical, literalist, Old Testament assault on women's lives, rooted in the Old Testament, literally rooted in the idea that women should cause the original sin, the myth, the patriarchal, really harmful myth that is weighed on and destroyed the lives of millions of women over generations and centuries, but the myth that women caused original sin and therefore deserve special curse and punishment, including that it is their duty to bear children and to have pain while doing so, to submit to their husbands as their husbands to the Lord, to be silent in the face of men. All of this is what's bound up with this Christian fascist movement. And in a very similar way that the Islamic fundamentalist fanatics of the Taliban, that is not representative of every brand of Islam, but it is a fanatical, woman-hating, Dark Ages variety. And I think what we see around the world is a rise of fascist forms of religion. We see Hindu fascist fundamentalism under Modi in India. We see this in different varieties, and it is a response within and on the terms of the patriarchal systems that we live under, the patriarchal system of capitalism, imperialism, and its different manifestations in the world, to the ways in which the traditional forms of patriarchy have been undermined. And there is a bloodlust revenge to slam women back into their place. And it's, it also couples with the more secular variety of this that we saw in Trump. It's part of the marriage between the Mike Pence Christian fascist American Taliban style and the Donald Trump, who everybody said, well, how could they get along? They're so different. Well, actually, grab them by the pussy. Reducing women to objects of sexual plunder is not that different fundamentally than reducing women to breeders of children and incubators in that sense. They're both turning women into objects and possessions of men. And that was a core point of unity between them. So I think it's a very apt analogy. And, just because since briefly on the topic of the Taliban in Afghanistan, it must be said, and we're seeing it today writ large, that the US was always lying. And it was a perverse lie when they said they went into Afghanistan to aid the women, which was never their motive. It was always a cover. And they didn't bring any kind of liberation to women. They to a small handful of women in the city of Kabul and a couple other places. There were women who were able to enter public life and school. But the majority of the countryside was never transformed on the question of women, because the U.S. wasn't there to do that. They worked through the archaic land warlords, and now they worked to bring the Taliban back. So, it's a perverse situation that the people of Afghanistan and the women there are going through that everybody should be learning about and opposing. But it's part of the web of the world that we're in that needs to be radically transformed.
Thanks for that, Sunsara. I want to recommend that people also check out. There's a piece there was an opinion piece a few weeks back. I believe Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times about the white supremacist Christian fascists who admire the Taliban. And it's worth looking at for what a whole section of people in this society are seeing and admiring about others who are winning at oppression of women and many other people. I want to just underscore that there is no Orientalism about this analysis that Sunsara is bringing forward. There's a commonality here that's worth recognizing and appreciating, while also seeing that, as Sunsara was talking about the Christian fascism in this country, it's completely American, what we see happening here in its expression. It is not only happening here, and it is happening here. And how we see it is an expression of a country founded on genocide and slavery, with the oppression of women in its very fabric. So I just want to put that out there. I know it's something that a lot of people are thinking about. And likewise, similarities have been made to the Fugitive Slave Act. In a recent episode of Amicus, Michelle Goodwin expressed this comparison this way. She said, Yes, this harkens back to the Fugitive Slave Act, which provided for citizen participation in the preservation of American slavery. It deputized citizens to surveil, to stalk, to apprehend people who were in violation of US laws by escaping themselves out of the inhumane condition of slavery. There were bounties that were provided for their success in surveilling and successfully apprehending individuals who dared to exercise liberty, autonomy, and freedom. When you think of this Texas law, there are certain analogs that eerily resemble that of the Fugitive Slave Act, in that it provides for financial remuneration of those citizens who were able to successfully peg someone who has aided or abetted an individual in obtaining abortion. And she goes on to say, virtually anybody who has been in the path of a person exercising the constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy. It is a very dangerous law. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on the comparison between what's happening in Texas to the Fugitive Slave Act and what we can learn from that comparison.
Well, I am myself going through a process of, like I think all of us are, of working to understand more fully the implications of this major change with this law. And there's a tremendous amount to learn from, and I've appreciated a great deal the lawyers who are going and looking at, and others who are highlighting the parallels to the Fugitive Slave Act in all its dimensions. And I think absolutely the case that it harkens back in several senses, in the deputizing and incentivizing of mass vigilantism as a form of enforcement of a law that is really about the absolute dehumanizing and enslavement of a section of the population. The forms are different, but the punishment and dehumanization bound up in this law and the forms of enforcement, the mass vigilantism. I think that is a very appropriate analogy. I've read a number of people who have also, I think, quite correctly said that the people behind the Fugitive Slave Act, the very same forces and their political descendants, and in many cases their literal descendants, are the same forces behind these laws today. They are bound together. The patriarchal Christian fascism has white supremacy woven into it. These things have never been separable. The Bible Belt has always been the lynching belt in this country for very real, historically developed reasons. And so there are parallels in that sense too. And the third parallel I've heard, which I think bears more recognition and people need to confront more fully, is a number of people have pointed to the Fugitive Slave Act. It was one of the major precipitating factors in the Civil War. What actually brought to a head the fact that there were two radically different kinds of there were essentially two countries in one. And today we have a similar situation. It's not two different modes of production. It's not slave economy and capitalist economy, which themselves were intertwined at the time. But it is really two countries in one. This is an analysis the columnist Leonard Pitts made, I think late last year, and that Bob Avakian also picked up and highlighted in his New Year's statement available at revcom.us, that on basically every fault line in society, white supremacy or our Black people and people of color, full human beings who shouldn't be terrorized by the state, on the question of the position and role of women in society, on the view towards immigrants, especially non-white immigrants, and the attitudes towards science and reality-based thinking, facts and evidence versus complete lunacy, fanaticism, denial, alternative facts, all of that kind of thing, that we really have two countries in one. And that a law like we just saw that is now in effect, which has been given the approval, yes, on a temporary basis, but with very great significance and indicating what is to come by the Supreme Court, is given approval to a fascist law that dehumanizes women and empowers the citizenry to enforce it, incentivizes that mob vigilante, quote unquote, justice in blatant violation of the rule of law and the Constitution. This is a dimension of where that's going to have to be resolved one way or the other. That's at odds with the way the country has been up until now for about 150 years. And the analogy with the Fugitive Slave Act too, and I'm not making predictions, but the analogy that brought to the fore and came to a head that one way or the other, the question of slavery was going to have to be resolved and settled for the country as a whole. There's a parallel here. One way or the other, this question of the position and role of women is going to have to be settled for the country as a whole. It's not going to exist piecemeal in this way for very long. And there is a section in society, we have to be real. That's what we saw on January 6th. That's what we've seen since then. That's what we saw in the armed anti-mask rallies, the people who were out to kidnap Governor Whitmer in Michigan. The movement that has plowed cars into protests. These fascist forces are preparing for a civil war. They are ready. Exactly what you said, Sam, in the intro to this segment. Before QAnon, before Trump, before a lot of the Tea Party, before a lot of the face of this fascism that people are more familiar with, there was the anti-abortion movement, the fanatics who bombed clinics, who killed doctors. They've been preparing to use extra legal and whatever levels of violence they need to take down the wall between church and state, to take down the modicum of protections that have been wrenched through people's struggle, civil rights and other protections that people have won through struggle. They want to slash all of that back and shatter the rule of law and force all out fascism. And I think this law in that sense further intensifies how acute and how immediately posed it is that this is going to have to be resolved one way or the other.
There are apt comparisons on a macro and a micro level, like in the mechanisms of the law, but also in what the law overall was trying to do, where there was a necessity that the slave states faced because they were losing enslaved people from people running away and escaping. And so this was, on the one hand, a proposed, solution to that so-called problem. It was a threat to their system continuing. And then it was also a concession to keep the union together. It gave legal backing to enforce and preserve the system of slavery through terror and kidnapping and unleashing, reaching out the hands of the law into the northern states to send people back. And the effect of it was that, free people were returned to slavery, were kidnapped, and it also loosened up the proof needed. So in cases there were, people who were not escaped slaves who were returned. And the overall effect was that it did reduce the number of slaves who were able to escape effectively. And I think that if this law stands, the effect will be the same very similar in subjugating and enslaving women, tying them to this role of breeder, where essentially their body belongs to the state, and that I think there are things to learn, and it is these attempted concessions to keep the country together, these divisions, and I do think that people should dig into the writings of Bob Avakian that talks about these divisions in society and what it will take, where that can go, and what the resolutions of those should be. But it is very possible that as a concession that, and maybe Sunsara, you could probably speak to this a little bit more, that as a concession, the Democrats are going, actually it's not a possibility. I think it's very likely, it's a probability that there isn't going to be the kind of fight waged to stop this, even though, we have a Democratic president and, Democratic majority in the House and Senate. this is to fundamentally challenge this. It would tear apart this country. And I guess I just want to say, like, one of the things that people are always saying here is like, well, why aren't the Democrats, ending the filibuster? Why isn't Biden supporting the end of the filibuster? He's told you why. He said it will tear Congress apart and nothing will get done. And these compromises that have been made with this, if you think of the fascists, Bob Avakian said there's a direct line from the Confederacy to the fascists of today. That pull to keep the country together by constantly appeasing and conciliating with that side of the country that actually believes in, so strongly that this has to be a white supremacist, male, patriarchal, Christian fascist society. We're always going to be up against that.
One other thing, just to touch on this Fugitive Slave Act, it had the effect that you were just highlighting, and the negatives, the ugliness, which is what its principal aspect was. But it also had the effect, and this is where another analogy I think is worth making, where because it obligated everybody nationwide to participate in, including the legal apparatus and the law enforcement arm in the North, to participate in the re-enslavement and, frankly, the kidnapping of many free Black people and sending them into slavery. This forced the question among many sections of society who were uncomfortable with slavery but did not feel it as an immediate outrage that they needed to fight. And you'll see, if you look at the history, where there were cases in Boston and Philadelphia, other places where Black people who were kidnapped and were being taken in shackles back down into the deep South to be treated as human chattel. This actually forced the question for the abolitionist movement. It forced the question for many others, and they became much more radical in many places. And there were cases where they surrounded the courthouse, hundreds or more of them, and refused to let Black people be taken back into slavery. And that was not the norm, but it began to radicalize and awaken many more people in the North and then throughout society. And I think that there is a way that the intrusion, the slap in the face that people woke up to on Wednesday morning in Texas, and then in the days that followed around the country as they learned about this, there is a moment where this is being put in people's faces that needs to have a similar parallel effect. And frankly, that awakening in the North and among the abolitionists, it fed into and strengthened what eventually became, Lincoln did not go into the Civil War feeling that, we want to end slavery. He said, I want to preserve the Union. If I could do it without abolishing slavery, I would do so. If I need to abolish slavery to do so, I'll do that. His objective was to preserve the Union. The fact that this Fugitive Slave Act actually helped force to the fore of the public awareness that what was really at stake was the question of slavery. And there were forces who seized on that heightened recognition to bring to the fore a stronger fight against slavery outright, the moral fight and then the practical fight, and actually contributed to a situation where, to win the Civil War, Lincoln did have to do the Emancipation Proclamation and finally bring formerly enslaved people into the fighting forces. So what happens, how people react, actually what we do in a moment like this can impact, but this goes back to the question of the power of protest right now, but also the power of getting organized for a revolution and hastening and ripening a revolution out of these conditions. The fact that these questions are being brought to a head has within it tremendous dangers. And that is the momentum and the direction things are going. But it also has the possibility, if we dare to arouse people, to organize people, to fight this, to really move millions in ways that they will not normally be willing to move. And that is an opportunity that is criminal to pass up because of what's at stake negatively, but also because of what's at stake positively. The possibility of really getting to a society and world where this is not what every generation has to fight over and over and over again. And we need to get organized and serious about bringing this system down.
And I think that's a great place to pause this conversation, which I'm sure we'll be continuing in future episodes. Now, I want to take a moment to heartily thank both of you for joining me in this essential conversation. We need a lot more of this. Right now needs to be a moment where we are calling for an all-out political revolt of millions, people from all over society who do not want to see a world, a society in which women are deprived of the right to an abortion and their full humanity. Now should be a time where everyone who cares about abortion being legal and accessible be in the streets, mobilizing others, taking whatever platform they have, whether they're a member of the clergy or artists or athletes or professors, that they're using whatever platform they have to stand against this law in Texas in the coming fight on the Supreme Court and use their platforms to make clear abortion on demand and without apology. I want to thank Sunsara and Coco for joining me in this conversation, and there will be more to come.
Thanks, Sam. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Sunsara.
Yeah, I'm so glad to talk with both of you. Thank you, Coco. Thank you, Sam. And yeah, let's do it again.
So yeah, this past week, the Supreme Court of the U.S. essentially overturned Roe v. Wade in Texas, with no exception for rape or incest. A monumental decision happened in the dead of night. For those so foolishly relying on a fascist-stacked majority, they made clear via shadow docket they have no plans to uphold the 50-year precedent of Roe, and that not every newspaper headline or news show cryon read Roe v. Wade overturned only added to the deafening silence we hear in the streets. If you are still scratching your head with how SCOTUS planned to rule on the direct challenge to Roe that's on their docket next term via Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, you saw their hand in this decision. Everyone, everywhere is needed to stop this fascist assault on abortion rights. I want to shout out and share a clip from the courageous women in Texas who participated in a Bands Off Our Body action the day the bill went into effect. And a special shout out to the tremendous dance piece that cuts to the heart of what's at stake, that was put on by Body Talk Dance Company, performed by young women ages 12 through 16 in Austin, Texas, performed in front of the Texas State Capitol. You can check out the video in our show notes. Cheers as well to those who took part in protests in New York City, Chicago, Honolulu, Boston, DC, and elsewhere this weekend. This urgently needs to grow and spread before SCOTUS is back in session. Be sure to tag Refuse Fascism on social media with any protests you have planned. Thanks again for listening. If you want to help the show, it's simple. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your listening platform of choice. And of course, subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can chip in to support the show by clicking the donate button at refusefascism.org or Venmo refuse-fascism, Cash App Refuse Fascism. I'd like to hear your comments, ideas, questions, skills you want to share. Tweet me at Sam B. Goldman, or you can drop me a line at samanthagoldman@refusefascism.org, or leave a voicemail by calling 917-426-7582. Are you a listener in Texas? I really want to hear from you. You can record a voice message by going to anchor.fm/refuse-fascism and clicking the button there. There's also a button right in our show notes. Thanks to Lena Thorne for helping edit and produce today's episode while Richie is recovering from illness. Hope you feel better soon, Richie. Seriously, folks, get vaccinated and wear your damn mask. Cover your nose. Thanks to Coco and Mark Tinkelman for also helping produce the show. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each episode, so be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox each week. Until next time, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.